All right, we can get started. Welcome to our monthly ErgoHour webinar. And I'm especially excited about today's session because we're kicking off our three-part series on designing an ergonomics program. And each session will feature expert insights and practical strategies to guide you through the process of establishing and optimizing your ergonomics program. And let me start with introductions. I'm Sophia, the head of customer success here at TuMeke, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Amaanat Gill, our new customer success manager. She's also a board-certified ergonomist with extensive experience in program development and management in industrial, office, and laboratory environments. And as you might already know, the process of integrating ergonomic practices within any organization is crucial for enhancing the well-being and productivity of employees. And a comprehensive strategy first starts with laying a good foundation. So in this session, we'll talk about identifying and engaging key stakeholders, how to sell the value of ergonomics to your organization, defining program and setting objectives, goals, and evaluation criteria, identifying and measuring risk, as well as, of course, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions live in our Q&A part of this webinar in the very end. Welcome, Amaanat. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Sophia. Excited to get this started.
Awesome. Fantastic. I'm excited too. And I would like to kick off our discussion today by asking you a more general question. So, fundamentals to ensure like everyone is on the same page here. Can you please describe ergonomics to me in layman's terms?
Yeah. So you'll traditionally see ergonomics being defined as the science of fitting the task to the worker to help decrease work-related musculoskeletal injuries, increase the efficiency of how someone's performing a task, and also to improve productivity. This is referring to a single process or task, and it is what we refer to as microergonomics.
Got it. So what's the difference between micro and macro ergonomics?
That's a good question. When we speak about macro ergonomics, we're talking about fitting the entire organization to its workers. So micro is the task to the worker, and macro is more the organization to the worker. So we want to harmonize the workplace factors and the task demands to your working population. So a lot of times when we think about ergonomics, we are thinking about it at the task level. It will always be important to have a micro ergonomic element and approach in your program because we all come in different shapes and sizes, and we're all going to have different requirements. So it's important to have that micro approach, especially when we're reacting to someone reporting aches and pains, or we need to be able to evaluate, how that one person is doing their job. But this alone isn't enough. There are a lot of psychosocial and organizational factors that can impact the ability to do your work productively and impacts the development of work-related injuries. So these factors are much more difficult to identify than physical risk factors. So a lot of times they're kind of left on the back burner, but they're still really important.
That makes sense. And yeah, thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah.
Maybe you can give some examples of such issues.
Yeah, so some of these things, these other risk factors outside of those physical risk factors would be like how much social support you feel like you have at work, how much control do you feel like you have over your day-to-day? Do you feel like you're being micromanaged, or do you feel like you're given enough autonomy to do your work on your own? Are you satisfied with the work that you're doing? Do you feel like your organization is invested in your growth? Do you feel as if that you're excited to what you're contributing to your organization? Another one is, do your task demands match your capabilities? So, on a regular basis, is the work that you're being asked to do matching like the human's a human's capability to perform those tasks? Because if they don't, it can result in you overexerting yourself over time. Another thing is your organizational structure efficient? Or does it create too many hurdles and lead to unnecessary work? And then a common one that we're seeing, these days is, do you have the correct technology to perform your task? A lot of times people try to like blanket the introduction of a new tech internally, and sometimes, it works for one function, but it can create more issues for other functions. So it may not be obvious that these are that there are ergonomic implications when you're thinking about these things, but your body can have a biological response to these factors and efficiencies, and it can lead to things like wasted motions. Without addressing those larger macro issues, your micro interventions will not be as effective. So if you're just starting out with creating an ergo program, it may be daunting to think about approaching it from at a macro level. So the goal of this webinar is just to kind of talk you through how you can take these approaches feasibly.
Super clear. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
very much for walking me through this. So why is it important to have an ergonomics program in the first place?
So we all know that the burdens of work-related musculoskeletal disorders are high, and if we've heard the benefits of ergonomic interventions time and time again. However, due to a lot of different factors, including bandwidth, budget, culture, etc., many ergo programs are reactive. It's important to have that reactive component to address situations that can arise, but to get ahead of the injuries in the first place, we need proactive measures in place. And getting buy-in from your organization and putting a program into writing can help you build towards having a more proactive approach.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So we spoke with you about, micro and macro approaches. How does formalizing a program help you have a more macro approach? I was curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know it's kind of hard to see how everything ties together, but having a written document shows your organization's commitment to the health and safety of their employees. It's your first step towards building a foundation of trust and sincerity, and also building a framework for action. It's also a way to clearly define who is responsible for what. It can help ensure that you have consistency across the organization, can help with knowledge transfer and sharing. So if, for example, if someone, the person who's in charge of that program leaves the organization, or, then if you have something kind of written down somewhere, you can kind of ensure like that program will continue on, as opposed to everything kind of falling through the cracks. Having something written down also saves time in the long run. It may not seem like that right away, but it can help save time, because you don't have to spend time deciding how to handle common situations or approach uncommon ones if there's written guidance on how to handle it. And I know it can seem really overwhelming to kind of have to create the whole program from scratch, but writing it down will help you see how everything kind of connects within your organization. And as you start to see how things are connected, you'll also start to uncover organizational issues that are impacting the well-being of your employees.
I fully agree with you. And it's always helpful to have those guidelines and playbooks handy so that you can review all together what's working, what's not working, and keep iterating on existing processes. Yeah.
It's your source of truth.
Yeah, exactly. So can you please break down to me like key elements of, an ergonomics program so that it would have, successful results?
Yeah, so the key elements of an ergonomics program, this is, like I do want to highlight that an ergonomics program is always going to be a process. So things I'm highlighting today, I'm referring to them as a program, but when you're thinking about developing an ergonomics program, just think of it more as a process. For today, the three components that we're going to talk about are the goals and objectives. So that's the first part, is setting those goals and objectives. The second part of this program and process is going to be identifying key stakeholders and their responsibilities. And then the next is identifying and measuring risk. So these are the three things we'll talk about today, but the next two components of your program will be intervention and implementation, and also setting a timeline for implementation. And then the last step is monitoring results, and then continuously kind of evaluating your program. So again, this will not be a linear process. You're going to have to visit certain elements as you have more information, as you've made progress, and as your priorities change.
Fantastic. I can't wait to deep dive into all of this with you. And so let's start from the beginning. How do you, kick off designing a program?
Yeah. So the very first thing to think about why is to think about why you're doing this and what you want to accomplish. So you need to define your problem, set the objectives and goals, and choose some evaluation criteria. This part of your program and policy document will be your North Star. So without doing this at the beginning, it will be hard to, see the whole forest when you're kind of stuck in the weeds all the time. So it's really important to, even though it might be kind of, hard or it might seem abstract at the beginning to kind of set those goals, having those written down somewhere right at the beginning will kind of help you have a reference point every time you've gotten way too into the weeds.
Know your why. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So does everyone need a full-fledged ergonomics program? Like, how do you decide, or how would you recommend if a person needs one or an organization needs one?
Great question. So all organizations can benefit from a full-scale ergonomics program, but the reality is that you might not have the resources for this initially, or there may be isolated but high priority issues that demand your attention first. So the first thing you need to do is get an idea of where your organization is and understand the magnitude of the problem. If all signs are pointing to organization-wide issues, then a full-fledged program is likely necessary. If you're only seeing issues in isolated areas or just with certain tasks, then for now you might be able to just focus your efforts there. And once those issues are addressed, you can focus on ramping up your program to be more proactive. In fact, to get in buy-in from other parties for a larger program, you might need to showcase your small wins first. So for example, if you buy yourself one license to a risk assessment software because that's all you had the budget for, but you need more help, to get more budget for next year, you'll need to show the progress you made with that one license and the potential for even more progress with more licenses.
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. So what would be the good first goal to start with?
Yeah. So the most obvious goal is to reduce risk exposure to musculoskeletal disorder risk and the instances and costs associated with work-related musculoskeletal injuries. These will often be the primary goals, especially when first starting your program. But keep in mind that ergonomics is not only about injury prevention, it's also about productivity and employee satisfaction. So those are also things to consider when setting your goals.
That makes sense. Yeah. And Amaanat, do you have any, maybe tips on setting effective goals?
So you've probably heard this many times, but I'm going to say it again because it is an effective way to set goals. Whatever your goals are, they will be the most effective if they are specific, measurable, actionable, and time-bound. So you've probably heard of this as being SMART goals, but this is a really good way to kind of break down each one. Otherwise, it will be hard to evaluate your performance.
Love this approach, and makes complete sense to me. So now that you've set your goals, you know what are you trying to reach. How do you go about like evaluation of that progress that you're hitting those goals, or maybe you're going completely different direction, and like how do you understand if your ergonomics program is actually being successful, like maybe setting specific KPIs and success metrics to measure it?
Yeah, it's a good question again. So the most important thing is like just make sure to look at what's going to be valuable for you, right? You're going to see, if you like Google Ergo KPIs, you'll see a lot come up. And I'm not saying those aren't valuable resources, but are they valuable to you, your goals, and your organization? And oftentimes when you do set these, you're going to kind of like categorize them to like lagging and leading indicators when you're looking at those Ergo KPIs. So the lagging indicators, they look at events that have already occurred and tell you where your organization stands. Examples include recordable injuries, workers' comp costs, and any other kind of injury data. These will tell you how effective your safety program is. So they are definitely important to measure, but what they don't tell you is anything about what could lead to ergonomic issues at your organization down the line. So they're not really giving you any proactive measures. And only looking at the lagging indicators will not do much for you if you're looking to be proactive, right? So everything could be fine. There could be really low rates of something, like musculoskeletal disorders. But let's say you've introduced a new process, and without kind of looking, from at the beginning, looking at what risk that process can prevent, we are going to miss everything until something happens. So that's why leading indicators are important, and they can help predict the likelihood of an event. So they can help your program be more proactive. And to identify those leading indicators for your program, you want to think about the different risk factors that are present at your workplace. So a lot, like the most common work-related musculoskeletal disorder risk factors are going to be posture, whether it's static or awkward postures, duration and repetition, intensity and force, psychosocial factors. And you'll also see things like contact stress, vibration, like extreme temperatures. But when you're kind of evaluating like which leading indicators are going to be helpful, you definitely want to think about those risk factors first to see what's present at your organization.
That's such an interesting topic, and I really like how you, distinguished leading versus lagging. I have a follow-up questions on leading indicators in the sense that have you seen companies using, data analytics, maybe some BI tools, or basically aggregating big data and then trying to turn it into like a predictive engine almost to try and predict like what's going to happen with, given the history and given, certain indicators that were, collected over a specific amount of time?
Yeah, so a lot of people will report on like the number of assessments they completed in a quarter or a year, right? And then they'll look at either the any discomfort data that they've been collecting, and a kind of pre and post evaluations, or injury data, and see if that has any correlation. Another thing could be number of ergonomics trainings completed. So, a lot of organizations will have a new hire training that every single person that is going to be in this specific, performing this specific task has to go through. Another could be any employee surveys that are kind of distributed, and these surveys are typically more gauged at those non-physical risk factors, kind of assessing like, do you feel like the organization is thinks your health and safety is important, things like that. And another thing would just be ergo audits, right? How many audits have you done of your workspace to identify those musculoskeletal risk factors?
Love it. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much for sharing. I mean, that was like one of the open questions for me, because I feel like companies who use data to, empower their decision making, they are, more successful in driving these types of programs, at least from what I've seen. So I was curious to hear your thoughts on that. What would be the benefits of looking at both leading and lagging indicators? Should companies move on to only leading indicators and forget about lagging? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I love that you asked that, because I think because proactive is tied to the leading indicator word, it seems like, well, the reactive one is a bad guy. Like, why are we looking at lagging indicators? They are still valuable. So the way that I like to think of it is that leading indicators will help you predict where your issues could be and allow you to be more proactive. But those lagging indicators will help you measure your progress towards that goal. So without knowing where your organization stands, without those lagging indicators, it's really hard to know if you're really accomplishing what you set out to accomplish.
Got it. That makes sense. So we'll keep both.
Yeah.
Both are important. I hear you.
Yes.
Cool. So in this whole process, right, who would be the key stakeholders that you would want to involve in building out or maintaining successful Ergo program?
The stakeholders are always going to look a little different for every workplace, but what you need to keep in mind is that you need buy-in from the top down and also the bottom up. If you don't have that buy-in from the top, you're going to have a hard time getting any resources for rolling out your initiatives, and you're you're gonna that buy-in from the top is going to be really important for integrating and ingraining, like first ingraining a solid culture of health and safety within the organization. But also when you have that buy-in from the top, you can kind of like piggyback off of a lot of other initiatives that are happening. So it doesn't have to be a separate process. Those leaders at the top can help you identify those areas like, well, we're doing this X, Y, and Z for this. Like, how does Ergo tie in? But if you
Absolutely.
don't have that buy-in from the employee level, you're also going to have a lot of you're going to have really poor adoption of the program that you're implementing. And also those employees are the experts at what they do, right? They know everything about these tasks. They're also going to be the people who can point out to you what needs to be fixed. So your understanding of what's really going on at the employee level will be really limited if you don't have their buy-in.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So that you want to get that kind of like holistic from all the sides buy-in to make sure everything runs smooth. So who would be these common, most common stakeholders in your opinion? Like what would they care about? Because what I'm thinking, like my question is, how do you actually get that buy-in? And so in order to do that, you need to know what each of them cares about, because I'm sure it would be different.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I mean, you just need to be able to speak their language, right? So I think before you do anything, you're going to have to figure out who those decision makers are, do your research, and then come prepared, right? Do some homework, understand what those people find important, and find data to support that. Because without that, if you have someone that's already very like enthusiastic about ergonomics, it won't be that difficult to kind of get their buy-in. If you have someone that like has never thought about ergonomics a day in their life and they have a lot of other priorities, without coming with some kind of prepared research or showing them some numbers on how these initiatives can help them and their priorities, it's going to be really hard to kind of again get that buy-in. So some common stakeholders are going to be your health and safety team, human resources, your C-suite, and your operations and engineering, and also your employees, right? So from the top, the health and safety team, that these are your dependent stakeholders, meaning that they have stakes in the program, but they don't necessarily have the power to enforce the program. So the things that they care about are going to be injuries and direct and indirect costs associated with those injuries. This group is most likely already understand why ergonomics is important. Typically with them, it's just kind of understanding like where, like kind of showing them how they can kind of carry out the program with the resources they have. So that's kind of important there, is understanding, okay, like where are their pain points? Is it they just don't have time? They don't have a designated person? They need additional tools? Understanding that is what you're going to need to get health and safety on board. But oftentimes you might be the person trying to get other people on board. So the health and safety team is probably going to be the group leading the charge, and they'll be the representative of the program at all levels. So if you're a part of health and safety, you might have to kind of to your boss, like make a case for X, Y, and Z. But this is typically going to be like your main ergo champions. At the HR, human resources, human capital management level, et cetera, they should care about good ergonomics, because ergonomics is associated with, like, good ergonomics is associated with decreased turnover and absenteeism, increased engagement, and also improved culture. So the culture part, I think a lot of times people kind of miss out on when we're thinking about ergo programs, but putting emphasis on a program that cares about, that at its core is just about the person working, is going to show a lot that you care about these people, right? So these are all things that HR will care about. For operations and engineering, this is another one that's never completely immediately obvious. But this is, again, we're thinking about macro ergonomics, right? Including the operations and engineering team in your journey to kind of get buy-in is going to be really important, because having good ergonomics is associated with less mistakes while performing the job, more like increased productivity, better performance, less wasted motions, and also improved quality of work, right? if people are performing their jobs with healthier bodies, they're going to be able to perform those jobs better.
That's
And then
right. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. And then the last one, which is the biggest one, is going to be your C-suite, right? The biggest reason that your C-suite should care about ergonomics is because it's been proven and well documented that there is a large return on investment. So workplace injuries and turnover from workplace injuries, or just like bad culture around health and safety, are a very, very, very large cost to an organization. And since people don't often associate ergonomics with these injuries or with that turnover, they're often just seeing it as like a perk of working at an organization, right? Like, oh, like I just started working here and we have really nice ergonomic chairs. A lot of times, because that's how it's framed in culture currently, people don't often make that connection between things like ergonomics and ROI, or ergonomics and employee engagement. So I know these people are busy. It might be hard to get their attention. So what I recommend is taking a look at your organization's statements of corporate kind of and social responsibility, and show your leaders how ergonomics contributes to those things, right? So we don't need to start a new framework. We can look at what is already important to them and kind of weave ourselves into it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And thank you very much for sharing this.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about, leadership and, higher up management. And I'm thinking if they, we're trying to get their buy-in and trying to understand what they care about, how to speak their language. Is there any commitment that is also required from their part? Just curious.
Yeah. So my mantra when you're kind of on this journey is that you need commitment at the management level and involvement at the employee level. So we do need some commitment from the management, and those things can look like requesting them to like speak to their direct reports and kind of gather the support and spread the message from the top. So people are starting to think about this and they're taking it seriously because it's coming from their boss. We want to work with them to kind of assign roles and responsibilities and commit resources, right? So Sophia, like we work together, but if I came to you and said, you have to do X, Y, and Z for this ergo program, I think coming from me, it would be like, why are you telling me to do this, right? And I'm not the right person because I don't have oversight over this. I'm not the right person because I have so many things on my plate. The management is going to know, right? Like who has oversight over what and who has the bandwidth to support these things.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think also just kind of like, quickly, like they have like the getting that commitment from management to help kind of like set goals for their teams, and also again, like I was saying, issue those statements that ergonomics is a priority for this organization, because that messaging is going to go a long way.
Absolutely. And I think it also helps with accountability of all the parties that are involved. So yeah, sounds like there is a lot of benefits to that commitment.
Yeah.
So how do you go about, engaging the employees? Maybe you have, specific tips or like from your personal experience to share from working in so many different environments.
Yeah. So the employees they're the experts at their job. So not involving them, like we said, is only going to decrease adoption of that program. But like we said, will be a disservice to you because you're going to miss a lot of valuable insights from them. So what we want are their insights, right? And we can get these in a lot of different ways. You can kind of get them informally when you have like team meetings, things like that. You can also just involve them in the risk reduction process. So let's see, you're getting a certain department that's reporting higher rates of injuries. You might want to go over to that department and see if any of those employees are willing to share information about any of the tasks that they have or that they're doing, and seeing, is this more comfortable than this, etc. And the more involved those employees are, the more invested and empowered they will be. So involving employees has also shown to kind of lead to improved employee satisfaction and retention. And another way to kind of engage with employees is, I don't know if anyone's heard of like grassroots ergonomics teams. I'm sure you might have them at your organization. But the employees that do really show a lot of interest and enthusiasm about this, you can train them to be your eyes and ears, right? You can give them very basic education on identifying musculoskeletal risk factors and kind of like, okay, that's a red flag, that's a red flag. And then from there, kind of include them in meetings with cross-functional teams, and have those grassroots like Ergo kind of get together so that they can share their feedback.
That makes sense. And yeah, having that, channel of communication constantly being open and introducing the feedback loop into the process is critical in any type of, process, like when we talk about organization. But I think especially about when we talk about, safety, space and ergonomics program specifically, that even plays even a bigger role. And can move things faster or block them if you don't have that feedback.
Exactly.
Cool. So you've talked about, how different, aspects of an organization can impact workers' health. So how would you go about identifying that risk, to address those aspects?
Yeah. So the first thing is identify who's in charge of that and that process, that risk identification process, and then obtain the resources for them to do that. So, it could be your EHS specialist that, they're new to the organization, they have some background in Ergo, and because like everyone else is busy, it's now been assigned to them. That's fine, but you want to make sure that they have the resources to kind of conduct those evaluations. So sometimes people, you might have to just recruit people to have them help you do this at a large scale. Sometimes if you don't have those resources, you're gonna need some technology to assist you.
Got it. And so how do you go about like the prioritization, knowing what to tackle first and then, what is less important?
So to kind of help you narrow down your approach, first you need to see where your problems are, right? So like get an idea of where things are. So you can look at your OSHA logs, you can look at your workers' comp claims, you can get feedback from employees that are involved in tasks that might have high levels of exposure to musculoskeletal risk factors. For example, like if you're working in some sort of like kind of warehouse environment and you see like just walking through that there are a lot of heavy boxes there and someone has to move those, you might want to walk over to those employees and see like, are you experiencing any issues with these? Another good thing to do if you're really starting from scratch is look up your industry and kind of research if there are any common workplace musculoskeletal disorders that are reported, not at your organization, but in similar roles at different organizations, and see if there's any data to kind of help you guide your efforts. And then if you have access to this data, you can also look at areas that have high turnover, right? And try to figure out what's causing that turnover. Once you've figured out where you need to focus your efforts, you can start to screen jobs and do some risk mapping. So for physical risk factors, it's a bit more straightforward. This is where your RULAs, REBAs, and other checklists kind of come into play. You can either do this by using paper tools, or if you have the resources, to kind of invest in some technology, there's a lot of tech out there. There are some AI assisted tools that can automate and make this process faster for you. This initial screening will help you identify kind of which areas you need to prioritize, which areas don't require intervention, and which areas have quick fixes and may not require a full-blown intervention, right? So for those things, right, like maybe there's like, it's one person performing a job incorrectly and you can kind of give them training and then you move on. If it's, you're kind of noticing that it's a larger trend, those areas you might need to do, a little bit more further analysis to kind of narrow down the risk. This is where things like the revised strain index, the revised NIOSH lifting equation, and the Snook tables come into play.
Got it. So this is more for like, of course, I think this is a first step, and we're talking about like physiological ergonomics. So talking more about like psychological or, organizational risk factors, how do you go about those? Like, do you also prioritize them in the very beginning, or what would be your approach?
Yeah, so those are inherently just a bit more difficult to measure for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think they're always the thing that comes top of mind. So less people have a process for this. But a lot of it is going to be related to perception and things like that. So not only is it harder to measure, it's also harder to fix. But you can do some of this kind of like discovery of the psychosocial and the organizational risk factors in conjunction with your discovery of those physical risk factors. So for example, when you are reaching out to a team to schedule a risk assessment, you can also include some type of formal or informal employee interviews to ask them to fill out a survey, maybe probing their perceptions of the task, right? So anytime I would do a risk analysis, yes, I would do all of like the RULAs, REBAs, NIOShes, but I'd always have a section in my report labeled employee interviews because you're going to get a lot of information there. If you want more formal methods, you can set up focus groups. You can kind of work on standardizing some sort of computer-based survey. You could consider tacking on a set of questions to larger like org-wide employee experience surveys. So a previous workplace of mine used to ask people about their perceptions of health and safety at work. Do they feel they have social support? Do they, like things about their job satisfaction? So that's another example of kind of like understanding the framework of your organization and weaving ergonomics in. Once you standardize these surveys, it's also important to include them in the appendices of your written ergonomics program. So when I'm kind of going, I know it's like Sophia and I have been talking about a lot of different things here. And we kind of split everything up into like different categories, right? Identifying risk, engaging stakeholders, and then kind of like measuring, like risk, all those processes. You want to make sure that you're not only just thinking of these at a high level, these are also going to be the categories of your written program. So everything you're thinking about right now, also think about how you can tie it back into that document. So these surveys, if you're including them, you want to make sure that they're in your Ergo program so that, again, you're having that consistency across your organization, people have something to reference, et cetera. And then something to think about for the future when we're thinking about like risk identification is to think of a process, like think of how it's going to be done in the future, right? Like once you've done this initial legwork of, looking at your whole organization, how is this going to happen in the future? Is there a trigger? Like, does someone have to report an injury for someone to go in and start looking at the task again? Is it done continuously, like on a yearly basis? You want to write these things down in your Ergo program as well.
Super interesting. Really love this approach and like the process you're suggesting. And speaking of surveys, let's run a quick poll to see how many of our attendees today are starting, an Ergo program or a process. I saw that one. Oh, thank you very much for answering. Yeah, I see that it's been already running. So we see that it's almost like a 50-50 split, I must say. Are you able to see results, Amaanat? Or so it's 44% who are starting from scratch, and then 56% are refining an existing one. Super interesting. But yeah, I would love to understand like how would you recommend people to go, about it, like for those who are just starting, how would you go about it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So most of the time, like you said, I'm happy to see that there's a 50-50 split and people actually have some programs because that's not always the case, right? A lot of the people that I worked at and like in previous jobs when I was a consultant, like we were always starting from scratch. So for those starting from scratch, I think it can be helpful for you. Like the first thing I want you to do, like, when you leave today, whenever you have the time and before our next sessions, is to draft some goals and objectives, right? Identify your leading and lagging metrics and think about what you really want to accomplish. Then maybe define the magnitude of your initial approach. So like we had mentioned before, right? Sometimes you might not have the resources for a fully fledged Ergo program. So first figure out what level of effort you are able to put into this and figure out, again, that magnitude of what your magnitude of the approach should be, and then determine a plan for your long-term approach.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what would be your advice for the folks that already have a program in place and they're trying to improve it?
Yeah. So if you already have a program in place, you want to kind of look at like go back to your initial goals and your objectives and see if you're hitting them, right? Because if you're not hitting them, that's going to be your first level of kind of identifying those opportunities for improvement. Take a look at your KPIs to see if you're missing the mark anywhere. Assess your KPIs to see if they're the right ones to be measuring, right? Are they providing any valuable information? Identify inefficiencies in your process and see if technology can help you streamline. Evaluate your program to see if you are capturing the non-physical ergonomic risk factors, because those are typically like from my just experience working, is like that's a lot of where the efforts are put in place are with those physical ergo factors. But see, are we doing anything, like are we missing anything at the organizational level? And then also look to see if you're getting full commitment and participation at the management and employee level. And this is something that you're going to have to do throughout, like over and over and over again, right? There's going to be changes in roles. There's going to be new people coming into an organization. There's going to be changes in priorities. There's going to be org restructurings. All of those things are going to constantly be like, they're going to keep happening. So if you have a program in place and you've done, that initial legwork of kind of getting everyone on board, we need to see if those people are still on board and if the right people are on board. Like, did someone leave and do we need to now get this other person's buy-in?
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And again, thank you very much for sharing this, Amaanat. Fantastic discussion. I personally learned a lot today. I hope our listeners did as well. And it's been a helpful, kind of like overview and starting point of our series. I suggest we now move on to our, Q&A section. Again, for those who are still, attending, feel free to send over your questions. I'll open our Q&A piece and I'll just start one by one. I see that questions about a replay were asked. We'll be sending over a copy very soon after the webinar is finished. All right, so so Latifa was asking, please share some examples of leading KPIs. I feel like we did, but Amaanat, if you can please maybe again share some examples, that would be great.
Yeah. So like we had mentioned, an example of like common leading KPI, like leading indicators for KPIs are like looking at how many like ergo interventions have you put into play in this year, and like how did that change the number of musculoskeletal risk factors and things that or injury that you had seen historically. Another one would be, like I had mentioned, training. I know a lot of people, like a lot of organizations, tend to report like touch points, almost like kind of like we did a new hire training once a week for X months. Those are X touch points with each employee group, and show like within that department, like how is that impacting their level of their risk there.
That makes sense. Latifa, let us know in the chat if that addressed your question. Also, Line, apologies if I butchered your name, commented, nowadays we don't only talk about Ergo program, but also Ergo process. One element the ergonomist needs to bring up within his or her role is to engage the organization to integrate the ergonomic activities in their current operation mode. Now, probably not always easy. She meant to write, but I fully agree, and I actually heard this feedback from other people in the industry too. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So like you kind of had mentioned, right? Like when you're kind of engaging people across your organization, you are going to be part of the reason that you're doing that, especially at the management level, is so that we can weave the ergo activities into how things are currently like operating. So going back to new hire training, because it's one of my favorite things to do, is when someone is being onboarded into an organization, they are, depending on the size of the organization, there's a lot of things that your company is going to want to share. things about benefits, things about like, these are your resources are on site. This is our emergency response protocol, like all of these things. A perfect way to kind of get the ergo foot in the door is see if you can get 5 minutes in that presentation, right? To talk about, okay, well, this is our ergo program if you have one. Or if you don't have an ergo program, kind of like, see if you can get some time to like, okay, well, there's this new hire event happening once a year. Can we get 20 or 30 minutes to talk about the importance of ergonomics? Another example is like with the employee engagement, right? When human resources and human capital management is looking at employee engagement, they're going to ask you questions about like, how likely are you to be at this organization a year from now, and all those things. You can start to ask questions about like, how does your perception of how like ergonomics or how the company handles health and safety issues impacts your longevity at this company?
That makes sense. Yeah. And actually, the question that I think was related to that comment, Rich sent over, he said, I'm curious about your definition of a program versus process. So yeah, that makes sense. So Scott sent another question. While ergonomics programs are often positioned from a safety perspective, they can deliver significant financial benefits to the organization. Can you elaborate on the potential ROI associated with a comprehensive ergonomics program, considering factors beyond just reduced injuries?
So with reduced injuries are obviously like the big one that I think, because I'm used to being in the health and safety world, that's exactly where my brain jumps to. But you're right, there are definitely other things that can have other factors that lead to that ROI. It can be things like reduced turnover, right? So let's say someone has to leave their job because they can no longer perform it anymore because these musculoskeletal issues, they are costs associated with rehiring and retraining people to do jobs. There are things like kind of your, like absenteeism. So like you could be at work, but you might not be working. So there is like also a cost associated with that time kind of not really focusing and not doing your job, and things that can impact your productivity. And there are a lot of resources on kind of like ROI that are out there. So I think Sophia, like TuMeke has some that we can share as well, but that was a good question.
Absolutely. Yeah. Julie also asked, is there a reference document providing the studies that prove that ergonomics is a worthwhile and important investment on the part of management?
Yes. So if you Google it, you'll probably find a lot of resources. I know a lot of like public universities and things like that will like willfully share, this is what my ergonomics program looks like, this is what we did to engage these people. And these are also resources that TuMeke is putting together and has already. So if you visit our website, you'll see some kind of information on ROI, on kind of kind of, again, things that emphasize the importance of investment from management. And if there's anything there that you're like, okay, well, this is nice, but like I need a little bit more information, let us know, right? Having that feedback from you guys has been valuable, so we know what information or content to be providing you moving forward. Our goal is just to kind of help you guys like carry this out in your organization. So we're more than happy to provide you with more information.
100%. So Nick sent us another question. Our ergonomics program has 6 locations in varying stages of the progress. We built ergonomics assessments into process engineering responsibilities to be able to focus on large risk reductions through the hierarchy of controls. Do you recommend in the structure of an ergo program that a multidisciplinary team should also be involved to address low-hanging fruit?
Absolutely. Like 100%. We need to attack from as many angles as possible. And that low-hanging fruit, one is, again, it's easy to address. Like kind of when we were talking about like, what is the magnitude of your effort? If you don't have the resources for a large effort, the low-hanging fruit is where you start. And that's when you kind of start to build the case for that larger program. Sounds like you already have a larger program in place, but a lot of times the low-hanging fruit, because the results are fast, like you can address those things quickly, and then people will see the kind of like the positivity of those like interventions much faster. And that's a really good way to get people excited about your program as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Also, Rich asked, any suggestions on driving recommended long-term physical technique changes when pulling, pushing, and lifting?
Yeah, so I mean, for training with Ergo, you want to look at what those risk factors are. So like if someone is kind of bending and like lifting, right? You want to look at like the different things that can exacerbate that lift. So a big one is going to be the horizontal distance from you, right? So one of the things that you teach someone when they're doing proper lifting is keep the load close to you. Another thing that can impact that risk of injury is going to be kind of like hinging at the hips, like that trunk flexion. So we want to decrease that. So when you're teaching people how to lift safely, you tell them to not bend at their trunk. You tell them to kind of bend at their knees. So those things are helpful. And then pushing and pulling, if it's allowed, right? If there's no clearance issues and you can see over whatever you're pushing, you want to be able to push instead of pull. You're using your larger muscle groups that way, and you're also using the weight of your body. Was there anything else, Sophia? Sorry.
No,
With that question.
that was great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we have 2 minutes left, so let me see what other questions do we have. I see, Latifah, I see your question on the wrist assessment, and we'll be able to follow up with you by email to help you do that. You can do that with revised hand strain index assessment in TuMeke, and we'll walk you like step by step on how to do it. And I also saw your comment. Latifah shared, to gain both commitment and engagement, each needs to be convinced of the benefits to them. Employees enjoy healthier life and prevents incidents. Management reduces long-term injuries, lost time incidents, insurance, etc., and reputation. Yeah, so thank you very much for sharing this, Latifah. I think we are pretty good, and I know we're at time. Thank you so much for sending all of your questions. Lena shared, thank you, great presentation. I support and excitement all what Amaanat explained. In my current role, I have to leave the call. All good. Thank you all for joining. Again, feel free to drop a quick assessment of how did we do today if you enjoyed our webinar. And we'll see you in a month from now for our second session of this series with ErgoHour. Amaanat, thank you very much again. Enjoy your afternoon, everyone, and see you very soon.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.